just after 5 now, a minute after 5. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen in the chamber. Good evening, those who have joined us virtually on the platform. Welcome to this second public hearing dealing with 3 very important pieces of national legislation affecting transport. So I hope this is the second and the last public engagement process that we will receive, as we have received so far meaningful input from stakeholders and department and interested parties. My name is Derek America. I'm the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Mobility. So this engagement is being done in terms of the rules governing virtual meetings. And I would like to mention that we are using the MS Teams meeting platform, and the proceedings are also aired live via YouTube, which any interested persons or institutions, stakeholders may tune into and follow our proceedings. May I ask guests on the virtual platform, except those who are presenting in the meeting, not to switch on their mics or the cameras or whatever, or speak if they are not requested by the chairperson to do so. I'd like to indicate for members who are online that should they experience technical difficulties, and this is to avoid any unnecessary background noises that may influence the ability of those who are present and online to follow the proceedings. I'd like to ask members that should they wish to bring any matter to the attention of the chairperson, that they should use the chat function, and those who are in the chamber could simply just indicate their desire to make a intervention or contribution. To participants, I'd like to just mention that I've never experienced this order in our meetings. So it is superfluous for me to mention that the standing rules and directives for meetings that were adopted by this Parliament on the 17th of April 2020 shall apply. And I have, in my 2 years now, whilst we are doing virtual meetings, I was never expected to apply that particular standing rule. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we do not have interpretation services available for this meeting, so I would request that we conduct the meeting in English, but should the need arise where it is inevitable that one could express yourself more clearly and more articulately, you may use the language that you're comfortable with. We will then make a plan to have it translated for those who may not be conversant with a particular language. So as I was saying, I'm Derek America. I'm the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Mobility. I'm going to ask the members who are present in the meeting to introduce themselves, and I will start with the members in the chamber, and then I will go offline, online, just to establish that we have a quorum.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, everyone. My name is Isaac Mbulelo Sileku. I'm a member of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Sileku. Online, any members online?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is Kayla Murray. I am a stand-in or an alternate for this committee. Thank you.
Good evening, Honourable Murray. Any other members online present? Seems we're only members here. Thank you so much. So with us, we also have various stakeholders, Department of Transport, Department of Mobility, Department of the Premier, Salga, we have Golden Arrow, and we have a private individual. So once we commence with the process, formally, which is of course, then the presenting party could introduce the delegation. So ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we are dealing here with 3 bills, and they are national bills, and they were referred to the province by the NCOP. So as we are fairly conversant with the flow chart of legislation, first go to the National Assembly, thereafter it goes to the province, National Council of Provinces, and if it's tagged the 76 bill, it then gets referred to the provinces, and all 3 bills that we are dealing with here tonight are 76 bills, hence it being with the province, and we're not only the only province who are dealing with these bills, all other 8 provinces are dealing with it as well. So on the 3rd of March 2023 and the 4th of April 2023, the Standing Committee on Mobility were briefed on the bills by the National Department, during which time the committee, after which the committee deliberated on the bills, not in detail, but also deliberated on the process to be followed thereafter. And that basically evolved around the public engagement process. In that meeting, the committee resolved to facilitate 2 public hearings, and the first hearing was on the 23rd of May. It was in George, and it was in person. Today is the 30th of May. It's in Cape Town. It's been classified as a hybrid meeting, and the link for the hybrid hearing was communicated to all stakeholders, can be requested and obtained from the procedural officer. All municipalities and district municipalities were invited to submit comments and requested to inform the ward councillors and community development workers. Various other stakeholders were also invited. Advertised Cape Argus, the Son, City Vision, George Herald, Duren, and the Westlander. We also made use of social media platforms to inform the public about the hearings, awareness on the Western Cape Provincial Parliament website with a link to a questionnaire to submit comments were also made available. So tonight is the second hearing, and all 3 bills will be dealt with. Officials from the Department of Transport will provide a brief, which I would then allow any submissions from the public and or other stakeholders, and that includes the Department of Mobility. So the 3 bills that we're going to be dealing with are the Economic Regulations in Transport Bill, the National Land Transport Amended Bill, and lastly, the National Land Transport Amendment Bill and the National Land Transport Traffic Amendment Bill. So we have not received any requests from the public or stakeholders to make submissions at the George hearing, and neither have we received any such requests for this meeting, but I am extremely flexible if there are members of the public and other stakeholders who have not been formally communicating with us and wish to make a submission or input, they will be granted such an opportunity. So that's the process that we're going to follow, colleagues. And let me once again reiterate my delight and my thankfulness that you have availed yourself to be present here tonight. Both, and they will affect the industry and the people of South Africa in many ways, and we need to engage as widely as possible so that present legislation in the lives and also make public transport for people to use. Without further ado, before we commence, I'd like to introduce my procedural officer, Mr. Johan Kutsi, who has done all the work for us to meet tonight and enjoys, and in many other ways. Thank you, Johan, for that. So, colleagues, with that said, I just ask Johan, is there anything that you'd like me to add?
Chairperson, no, just that Mr. Smith joined us now. Mr. Smith, maybe if you can just mute your camera as well, and the chairperson will call on you as soon as we're ready to take your submission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you. Johan, did we receive any apologies to your knowledge?
No apologies received. Just that Mr. Derek Meyer will stand in for Mr. Francois Meyer from Golden Arrow.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. So you're going to start with the first one. I'm going to hand over now to the Department of Transport that will introduce the delegation, and then we will take it from there.
Good day, Chairperson. Thank you very much for receiving us. The team that is here is 3 of us who will be presenting on the economic regulation of transport bill. The other 2 teams are going to present online. I'm Mvikeli Ngam from the Department of Transport. I'm leading this team. On my right are 2 gentlemen, Alan Chikamvi, who is the project manager, and who will do the presentation. On his right is Dakalo Masia, who is also part of the team of the STE or ERTP. Thank you for this opportunity. So I've rolled the red carpet for Mr. Chikamvi to do a high-level presentation on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But before we do that, thank you, Ms. Mkamu. Could we just ask the other delegations just to introduce themselves so that we get a sense it's all in the room? Can I just move over to the Department of Mobility?
Good evening, Chairperson. I'm Ricardo Collins. I'm the Director responsible for land transport contracts within the Mobility Department.
Good evening, Chairperson and the House at large. I'm Faisal Mbambo from the same Mobility Department, dealing with land transport and oversight and freight. Thank you very much.
Then we have the Department of the Premier.
Good evening, Chair. Lionel van der Schijf, Department of the Premier, Legal Services.
We have Salga.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Carl Punt, Salga Western Cape representative to the Provincial Parliament. Also with me on this platform is Alderman Gert Kombrink, who's also SALGA Western Cape representative to the Provincial Parliament. Apology for Alderman Paul Swart. And then the SALGA officials present also on the platform is Ms. Chantal Regoben and Mr. Armstrong Mpela. And with you in the chamber, Chair, is Unathi Ntononsi, who's from SALGA National, and he will do the presentation today. And also accompanied by Mr. Loyiso Nyamela. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Pent. And then I think we have Golden Arrow in the meeting as well.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Yes, Mr. Merlin Titus from attorneys firm Miller Hendricks on behalf of Golden Arrow today.
Good evening, Chair and colleagues. My name is Derek Meyer, General Manager for Golden Arrow Bus Services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Isaacs. And then we have also on the platform Mr. Mr. Smith, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Virtually.
Hi, good evening. I'm Yahya Smith. I'm just a interested party. Thank you.
Welcome and thank you, Mr. Smith, and welcome to the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are just two other persons present who have not introduced themselves. They kindly do so.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. My name is Annika Clark. I'm the Content Advisor supporting the Select Committee that's dealing with the bill in the NCOP. I'm here observing today.
Thank you, ma'am. Just press the button.
Good evening. Johannes Makhat is my name. I'm with the National Department of Transport, and then I'll be presenting the National Road Traffic Amendment Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mkhatu. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the Department of Transport, and particularly the presenter, Mr. Kamvi. Welcome. And what we're going to do, we're going to flight the presentation. Yeah, Johan will do it then.
Chairperson, if it's me that's going to start, I think Mr. Kuzie can do that because already it was shared some time back. So
okay, it doesn't really matter. It is fine.
Okay, sure.
But what we want to do is that we want to flight it on the screen so that those who are with us virtually, so they could also then follow the presentation.
It's all in order, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're going to do it?
What would be the road transport?
We're dealing with the land transfer there?
Oh, I'll be dealing with the National Road Traffic Amendment Bill.
So we're doing that first or we're doing the land?
Maybe we can start with my colleague, but then I wouldn't mind starting first, Chairperson, if it's enough.
I'm going to ask Mr. Mgamu to direct me as to who. Okay, Alan, Alan, maybe you should start then. Thank you.
Good evening, Honourable Chair, Honourable members, excuse me, and colleagues. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to take you through the ERT bill, which is Economic Regulation of Transport Bill. Basically, the table of content that the presentation outlines as follows. Then I will take you through what economic regulation is, and why do we need to have a single transport economic regulator. And I'll then take you through the components of the ERT bill together with the funding model. Next slide, please. Basically, economic regulation refers to controls within the transport sector to ensure safe and reliable transport system at a fair tariff and the agreed minimum service standard made available throughout the country. And its objective are to ensure that services provided are efficient, effective, sustainable, and meet consumer needs. Through consumer regulation, consumer protection, service quality regulation, price regulation, and competitions regulation. And its significant impact within the transport sector is that we will then have a better pricing service levels for major pieces of transport infrastructure, and we'll also have an independent appraisals body to deal with problems on that infrastructure or a service which is being offered within the transport sector, as well as a specialized body to help with the designing and the oversight of concession agreements. And also the regulator may also then engage provincial municipalities authorities with regards to economic regulation, research, publication, education, staff development and training, provision of technical assistance or expertise, cooperative activities to detect and suppress prohibited conduct offences, which are stipulated within the ERTPL. So one would then wonder, why is it that we need to have this single transport economic regulator? When we were conducting our situational analysis as well as other benchmarking exercises, we then realized that South Africa needs to ensure that there is efficiency and cost effectiveness within its transport system in order to meet the economic and social goals. And then we then ended up realizing that some of the preconditions for efficiency and cost effectiveness do not exist as yet in the sector due to the following reasons. There is potential conflict of interest where you find that a state-owned entity have been given monopoly powers as well as the regulatory powers. And then we then realized that there's significant gaps in the regulatory framework, which inhibits government's ability to provide consistent and comprehensive economic oversight. And also within the economic regulation space, there is scarce skills and lack of capacity within that respective area. And also, as we were conducting international benchmark practice, we then realized that some other countries such as Netherlands and Rwanda, they have got a similar, they've got a multi-purpose regulator which consists of energy, your water, your communications, transport under one regulator. So we try to then to adopt such a model, but however, it's only focusing on the transport sector. And also there's absence of a clear appeals process for regulated entities. This you then find it, like for instance within the aviation space, where you find the regulating committee is the one that is currently providing economic regulation to AXA and ATNS. However, there isn't any appeals mechanism within that respect. So there's a need to then introduce such in order to allow efficiency and cost effectiveness within the transport sector. So there is by introducing the economic regulator, then we will then have to improve and expand the existing regulatory frameworks. We then improve the establishment of an independent complaints and appeals mechanism for all modes. We then strengthen the independence of existing regulator, develop rigorous and consistent methodologies and procedures, and then we then create sufficient and dedicated regulatory expertise. And then by expanding the existing regulatory framework, we then address issues of potential conflicts of interest in the implementation and oversight of transport infrastructure. We then introduce a regulatory oversight across the rail sector, and then deepen oversight across key aspects of the transport value chain. And then there was once an argument when we tried to start to develop the ERT bill to say what then informs the ERT bill. Then actually they're saying there isn't any policy which is actually identifying the need to develop the ERT bill. Therefore, indeed, currently there's a number of policies which informs the need to develop the ERT, the STEP, which is Single Transport Economic Regulator, which is one of them National Development Plan 2030. And then there's also a white paper on National Transport Policy 2021, and then a medium-term action plan. And then STAIR also forms part of the stimulus of the economic reform and stimulus package of South Africa, and it will help to realize the goals of Operation Vulindlela. And the SONA 2021, the president indicated that there is a need to have an independent economic regulator within the transport sector. So basically, I'll then take you through the process in which the ERT bill has processes which were undertaken for the ERT bill to end up being sitting here within the NCOP. The background is as follows. The ERT bill was first approved by Cabinet in 2018 to be published for public consultations, and it was then gazetted for public comments in February and in September. The reason we gazetted the bill twice was that in February the scope of the ERT bill was mainly focusing on the state-owned entities, and then a majority of the comments which we received then suggested that there's a need for us to also look at introducing economic regulation to other public entities as well as other private sectors, as well as the private sector. So then the ERT bill then was then revised accordingly, and then it was then republished for public comments again in September, since the scope of the bill had changed drastically, and then we then incorporated those comments which we then received in September. Then the bill went through the NETLAB process, and it was then submitted to the office of the Chief State Law Advisor, who then certified that, who provided a positive legal opinion which says that the ERT bill meets the constitutional requirements, and he tagged it as a section 76, which is one of the reasons why we are currently conducting these public hearings today. And then the bill, we then submitted the socio-economic impact assessment system reports to the Department of Planning and Monitoring and Evaluation, which then certified both the reports. And then the bill was then taken through the ESA class, and then Cabinet approved the bill to be introduced to Parliament. Then the bill went through the portfolio of committee on transport processes, of which they then gazetted the bill for public hearings, and then they started the process of deliberating on the ERT bill. And on 14 September 2022, PCOT then finalized their process on deliberating on the ERT bill. Then the bill was then presented to National Assembly, where they voted it to be introduced to NCOP for concurrence in 27 September 2022. Then I'll then take you through the components of the ERT bill. Basically, the ERT bill, it consists of 6 chapters, as you can see there, of which those chapters, they are divided into issues of substance and issues of governance. As you can see, Honorable Chair, on Chapter 1 of the bill, it talks through the interpretation, purpose, and application. Chapter 2 of the ERT bill then deals with the issues of access to rail infrastructure. And then Chapter 3 deals with the economic regulation of services, of transport facilities and services. And then Chapter 4 deals with the establishment of institutions, which are such as your ERT and the council, TTR and the council, which is the Transport Economic Regulator, and as well as the council issues of appointment of the council, as well as the board, etc. And then Chapter 5, it deals with the enforcement of the Act, and then Chapter 6, it deals with the general provisions. And then I'll then take you through, next slide, please. I'll then take you through issues of the government structure and roles of STAIR. Basically, the organizational structure will look like there will be a minister who's responsible for the single transport economic regulator. And the single transport economic regulator consists of two entities, which is the transport economic regulator as well as the Transport Economic Council. And the Transport Economic Council is then responsible for issues of, it serves as the primary adjudicative entity reviewing decisions which are made by the regulator. When an affected party applies for such a review, and reviewing the decisions of the regulated entities when a user of a facility or service provided or licensed by a regulated entity considers that its rights have been adversely affected. So that is one of the functions of the Transport Economic Council, and then as well the function of the Transport Economic Regulator will then be it serves as a primary technical, administrative, and enforcement regulator responsible for carrying out education, research, price control approval, access requests for approval, investigation of complaints, and enforcement of the Act. And within the TER, which is Transport Economic Regulator, there is what we call, there is a board which is responsible for day-to-day governance issues of the regulator. And it also ensures that there is effective use of the resources within the regulator. As well, it then ensures that the regulator complies with the legal and financial reporting requirements. However, the board does not interfere on the day-to-day activities of performing economic regulatory decisions, which is done by the executive regulatory panel, which consists of the CEO as well as the deputy executives within the TER. And basically the board is then appointed by the minister. And in order to allow independence between the TER as well as TEC, the council is then appointed by the minister, but through the process of going through the nominated people. The nominated people will be nominated by members of the public, will then be shortlisted by Parliament, and then Parliament will then interview those shortlisted people and then give recommendation for the minister to appoint a list of names of people whom the minister needs to then appoint. Next slide, please. I think I've spoken to this one already. Okay, then I'll take you through the objectives of the bill. Basically, the objectives of the bill are to ensure that it addresses the shortcomings through consolidation of economic regulation of transport within a single framework, and it makes consequential amendments to related acts, and as well it establishes the Transport Economic Regulator and the Transport Economic Council. Next slide, please. I want to take you through most of the details. Okay, I've spoken to this one already. Can we skip it? Okay, and then I'll then take you through the scope of the ERT bill. Basically, clause 4 of the ERT bill establishes a framework for the economic regulation of transport, and it defines the scope of the bill. All market entities, facilities, or services in the transport sector, which were subject to economic regulation in terms of the listed legislation, will continue to be regulated. However, when you look at, I think it's the previous slide on the previous one again. Thank you. But however, when you look at section 2 of the ERT bill, it then allows the minister to to also bring other private or public entities, market facilities or services within the scope of the bill, or also grant exemptions to entities should there be a need for them to be granted such an exemption. And also this allows the scope of the regulation to be tailored to address the economic problems that the transport market experiences and to change over time as market realities do. And then, as you can see, in bringing forth new entities or public new private entities or public entities, the minister has to determine whether a single firm controls more than 70% of the market. This 70% is to address issues of super dominance within the transport sector. And then the preconditions, it is also to define, to determine whether the preconditions of efficiency and cost effectiveness do not exist within a respective market. And in doing so, he must have found that at least one firm has market power when he's then determining the preconditions of efficiency and cost effectiveness, and also that a facility or resource is an essential facility. After having considered the opinions which has received from the Competitions Commission and the Competitions Tribunal findings of anti-competitive abuses in a respective market, or report from a market inquiry which has been conducted by the regulator. So in doing so, the minister then focuses on four key concepts, which is the market power, essential facility, and market inquiry. And then the bill then also allows the regulator to investigate complaints and monitor regulated sectors, services, facilities for compliance. It also issues compliance notices to a person or association whom the regulator believes has engaged in a prohibited conduct. It is an offense to fail to comply with the compliance order, and then the regulator may also refer alleged offenses in terms of the act to the National Prosecuting Authority. The regulator may also give substantial powers. Is given substantial powers in support in investigation, including the right to subpoena and authority to enter and search under warranty. And also these powers are then necessary in order to achieve goals of the ERT of the legislation. And then I'll then have to take you through the determination of price control. So basically, we then realize that on the price control of entities which are subject to application under this act, we then realize that transport sector varies. Like you've got aviation and rail. The methodologies which are used to determine a respective tariff or fare differs. Therefore, the bill is then designed in such a way that it caters for all the differences within price methodology setups. So what it then means is that each and every regulated entity must prepare and submit a request for a price control to the regulator for facilities or services they offer, and then the price control may then comprise of the tariff charges, fuel tolls, or revenue cap, a limit on the rates of return, or a combination of the above methods. And then the price request may be in a prescribed form and include associated service standards, and the regulator, after having received that, then will then have to determine whether they are going to adjust the price control or requested by the regulated entity with or without conditions. And some of the factors which are used to determine the price control include operating efficiency, the need for investment, security of supply in the market, opportunity cost of capital, likely effect on economy, employment, consumers, and small medium enterprises, etc. And then next slide, please. I think I've spoken. Oh, then I'll take you through chapter 2, which talks to access to rail infrastructure. Basically, in determining whether to grant access approval, the regulator must have found that whether there is available capacity on the infrastructure or facility, whether the access applicant is able to meet financial and other technical requirements necessary to successfully operate the infrastructure, or whether the applicant has received other regulatory approvals that may be required by or in terms of any law or regulations, or is likely to receive such approvals before the finalization of its application. Then the regulator in deciding whether to grant access approval or not, the regulator must then grant access approval if all the requirements set out in determining whether to grant access approval are met. Then the regulator may also grant access approval even if the requirements of determining whether to grant access approval are not met, provided that the access seeker has given a written undertaking to the regulator to fund the required investment in infrastructure, and any party that is aggrieved by the decisions of the regulator in terms of this section may then appeal to the council against the decision of apply to the council for a review of the decision. Then, with regards to cession, transfer, or assignment of access rights to a third party, an entity that has been granted access approval by the regulator may cede or transfer any or all its rights, access rights to a third party on the conditions that the entity must first notify the infrastructure owner and the regulator of its intention to cede or transfer access rights. And then the entity ensures that all its obligations remain fulfilled, and that third parties may not cede transfer such as access rights to any other operators. It is to avoid issues of people or of entities seeking access rights for commercial gains. Next slide, please. I think I've spoken through this one already, Honorable Chair. I've spoken to this one as well. Next one. Okay. Then I think I've spoken to this one already. And then I'll then take you through the consequential amendments. Basically, the bill intends to make consequential amendments and transition arrangements to the following acts which are listed there, which is the National Ports Act, Airports Company Act, Air Traffic and Navigation Services Act, Company Act, sorry, and the National Land Transport Act, together with the South African National Roads Agency Limited and National Roads Act. Basically, on the National Ports Act, all the functions of the ports regulator will then be assumed by the TER. And as well, the functions of the regulating committee, which falls under Airports Company Act together with Air Traffic and Navigational Acts, will then be assumed as well by TER, by the regulator. And then with respect to the National Land Transport Act, the regulator will assume the function of overseeing the fares charged for public transport functions and the preconditions of determining the fees, which is as stipulated in Section 28 of the National Land Transport Act. And then under the South African National Road Agency Limited and National Roads Act, the minister's powers to determine the toll fees will then be assumed by the regulator. And then I'll then take you through funding of TER as well as the TEC. Basically, at inception, Honorable Chair, it is unavoidable to fund stay from the fiscus. However, in a in a medium term and a long term, the institution should be self-funding. This is critical because it will then allow the independence of the regulator, and as well the principles of how those fees are going to be charged to regulated entities will be set in concurrence with the Minister of Finance, as well as the overall amount of money which is going to be collected must be in line with the needs of stay and actual cost of regulation, And checks and balances need to be done to ensure that the regulator is as efficient as possible in completing the regulatory task, and regulation is only undertaken where it improves economic outcomes and value for money. I think as way forward, Honorable Chair, would like to seek approval from the ERT bill by NCOP, so that the bill can be sent to the President for enactment, and then we kickstart the process of establishing STAIR. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sikampi. I'm panning back to Mr. Nkambu, to direct us who's going to do this second presentation, Ms. Advocate Mokhato.
Thanks, Chairperson. As I said earlier on.
Just a moment, Advocate. Which one are we going to deal with?
The National Road Traffic Amendment Bill.
National Road Traffic Amendment Bill. Okay. Thank you. You may proceed, Advocate Mokhato.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chairperson. Good evening once again. We have a presentation made up of 23 slides or so, Chairperson, and the outline thereof is that we'll provide a bit of a background, the objects of the bill, the do it clause by clause, the consultation processes that this bill has undergone, parliamentary procedures, and the recommendations. Next slide. Okay, thank you. The bill was passed by the National Assembly on the 27th of September 2022, and it was drafted to give effect in the short term to some of the principal strategies contained in the National Road Safety Strategy. The strategy, among other things, sets out contains the Millennium Development Goals set out by Ministers of Transport in Africa for purposes of reducing crashes, improving traffic law enforcement, improving on existing mechanisms, and creating more measures to ensure road traffic safety. This bill, Chairperson, seeks to achieve proper implementation of the strategic interventions highlighted in the road safety strategy and to address practical challenges attendant thereto. Now, the objects of the bill, Chairperson, are such that it seeks to provide for the registration and licensing of motor vehicles, manufacturers, bodybuilders, importers, and manufacturers of number plates. It seeks to empower MECs to register an applicant as a manufacturer, bodybuilder, builder, importer, and manufacturer of number plates. It seeks to regulate the registration and grading of applicants as driving school instructors, direct how the application and registration of driving school instructors should be made, and it seeks to further regulate the driving school industry and to prohibit the operation of unregistered and ungraded driving schools and utilization of ungraded driving school instructors. The bill further seeks to ensure misconduct and criminal processes are more efficient, effective, and properly enforced and implemented. It seeks to empower MECs to declare as void documents purporting to be driving licenses. It also seeks to empower the minister to appoint a personal authority as an inspectorate of driving license testing centers, and it seeks to ensure compulsory registration and grading of driving schools and the suspension and cancellation of registration by the MEC. Now, clause by clause discussion of this bill is such that clause 1, Chairperson, amends existing definitions, and it inserts new definitions in order to assist in the interpretation of the Act. Clauses 2 and 3 amends sections 3, capital A and B, respectively, to include notice officers, reserve traffic wardens, and traffic wardens to be appointed and registered by the Chief Executive Officer. The Chief Executive Officer here, Chairperson, if I may pause for a bit, is the CEO of the Road Traffic Management Corporation, an entity of the Department of Transport, known for short as RTMC. Clause 4, Chairperson, amends Section 3, capital C of the Act by providing that no person shall be registered or remain registered as an examiner of vehicles, traffic officer, reserve traffic warden, and notice officer, if such a person or his or her spouse has or acquires a direct or an indirect financial interest in the manufacturing, selling, rebuilding, repairing, and modifying of vehicles. Clause 5, Chairperson amends Section 3, capital D of the Act to provide for the minimum requirements and qualifications instead of a diploma for registration as an inspector of licenses, examiner of vehicles, examiner of driving licenses, or traffic officer. A reserve traffic warden, and notice officers are included. Clause 6, Chairperson amends Section 3, capital E of the Act by providing for the suspension or cancellation of registration of an examiner for driving licenses or an examiner of vehicles if such a person was convicted for a crime as contemplated in Schedules 1 and 2 to the Criminal Procedure Act, or if such a person has direct or indirect financial interest in the transport service business or motor vehicle businesses. Clause 7, Chairperson amends Section 3, capital I of the Act, providing for powers and duties of traffic officers. Chairperson, this law seeks to also add a new paragraph in Section 3, capital I, which provides a further power of a traffic officer to impound a motor vehicle if the traffic officer is satisfied on reasonable grounds and subject to verification by the traffic officer that the motor vehicle was issued with a notice to discontinue operation in terms of Section 44 of the Act, and that the notice contemplated, the notice was not complied with, or the motor vehicle is being operated on a public road by a driver who is not the holder of a valid driving license, or is being operated on a public road by a driver who is not the holder of a valid driving permit, a valid professional driving permit, sorry. Clause 8, Chairperson substitutes Section 3, capital L of the Act to preclude a department of state or authority from offering authorized officer qualifications unless such a department of state or authority has been approved, registered, and graded as a training center in accordance with the prescribed requirements. Clause 9, Chairperson inserts new Section 3, capital M, N, O, to provide for application for and the registration and grading of training centers by the Shareholders Committee, and also provide for the suspension and cancellation of registration of training centers by the Shareholders Committee. Just to pause there, Chairperson, Shareholders Committee here refers to the Shareholders Committee established in terms of the RTMC Act, which is made up of the Minister as the Chairperson and the 9 provincial MECs. Clause 10, Chairperson amends Section 5 of the Act and provides that manufacturers, bodybuilders, builders, and importers must apply for registration to the CEO, and that they shall not manufacture, build, modify, import, sell, or distribute motor vehicles unless registered in the prescribed manner by the CEO. This clause, Chairperson, further seeks to insert Sections 5, capital A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and L in the Act. This clause, Chairperson, provides for the manufacturing of blank number plates, supplying of blank number plates, manufacturing of reflective sheeting for number plates, supplying of reflective sheeting for number plates, and embossing of number plates. Further thereto, this clause seeks to prohibit the manufacturing of number plates, supplying of blank number plates, manufacturing of reflective sheeting for number plates, supplying of reflective sheeting for number plates, and embossing of number plates unless the person, authority, or organization is registered. A person or authority or organization, they may apply to the MEC for registration as a manufacturer of blank number plates, supplier of blank number plates, manufacturer of reflective sheeting for number plates, supplier of reflective sheeting for number plates, and embossers of number plates. The MEC may, subject to due process of law, suspend or cancel the registration if the person no longer complies with the prescribed requirements. This clause further, Chairperson, seeks to provide for weighbridge facilities. It prohibits anyone from operating a weighbridge facility unless such a person is registered. A person or authority or organization desiring chairperson to operate a weighbridge facility may apply to the MEC for registration, and such registration may, subject to due process of the law, be suspended or cancelled by the MEC if such a person, authority, or organization no longer complies with the prescribed requirements. This clause chairperson seeks to provide for the manufacturing and supplying of microdots as well as microdot fitment centers. This clause prohibits a person, and it provides that no person may manufacture or supply microdots or operate a microdot fitment center unless such a person is registered. A person or authority or organization may apply to the MEC for registration, who may, subject to due process of the law, suspend or cancel the registration of such a person, authority, or organization where they no longer comply with the prescribed requirements. Clause 12, chairperson amends Section 6 of the Act, which provides for appeals to the Shareholders Committee. Provides that in the event that a person is aggrieved at a refusal by the CEO to register him or her as a manufacturer, or if a person is aggrieved by a suspension or cancellation of registration, this proposal seeks to extend the right of appeal to a manufacturer of blank number plates, manufacturer of reflective sheeting for number plates, supplier of blank number plates, supplier of reflective sheeting for number plates, embossers of number plates, weighbridge facility, manufacturer of microdots, supplier of microdots, and microdot fitment centers. Clause 13, chairperson amends Section 7 of the Act by providing for the Inspectorate of Manufacturers, Bodybuilders, Importers, of number plates, microdots, weighbridge facilities, whose powers and duties are to be prescribed in the regulations. Clause 14, chairperson repeals Section 8 of the Act, and whereas Clause 15 amends Section 8, capital A of the Act by providing that a driving license testing center may apply for registration for operation of a mobile facility for purposes of testing applicants for learners' licenses. Clause 16, chairperson amends Section 9 of the Act to include grading of driving license testing centers in the Gazette, in addition to the notice of registration. Clause 17, chairperson amends Section 11 of the Act to remove the involvement of the Shareholders Committee in the appointment of the Inspectorate of Driving License Testing Centers. As Clause 18 inserts a new Section 11, capital A, in the Act to provide for the appointment of the powers and duties of provincial inspectorates, whose powers and duties must be prescribed by the Minister of Transport in consultation with the relevant MEC. Clause 19, chairperson amends Section 15 of the Act, which provides for the disqualification from obtaining or holding a learner's license or a driving license. This clause chairperson seeks to include a driving permit in the disqualification. This clause further seeks to include physical defects in the requirements for disqualification, and that the CEO may attach in respect of an issued license by a person who has to drive with the aid of glasses, an artificial limb, or any other aid. Clause 20, chairperson amends Section 16 of the Act by providing that any person who is a holder of a license authorizing the driving of motor vehicle, who becomes aware that he or she is disqualified from holding such a license, must submit the license to the CEO, who in turn must cancel the license, and if the license was issued in a prescribed territory, the CEO must notify those territories of the cancellation. Clause 21, chairperson amends Section 17 of the Act by providing that a person shall not willfully or negligently issue a learner's license or authorize the issue of a learner's license, endorse or fail to endorse a learner's license, or produce, print, or manufacture any document similar to a learner's license contrary to Chapter 4 of the Act. Clause 21, chairperson seeks further to provide that an applicant for a learner's license who makes use of any unauthorized aid during a test for learner's license, or is found in possession of an aid that may assist such a person in answering a test for a learner's license, shall be disqualified from reapplying for a learner's license for a period not exceeding 24 months from the date of disqualification. The Minister will, in terms of this Act, this clause be empowered to make regulations regarding the due process that will be followed before a person is disqualified. Clause 21, Chairperson, adds a new, clause 22, sorry, adds a new subsection 5, capital A, in section 18 of the Act and prohibits the use of unauthorized aid during a driving license test, and a guilty person will be disqualified from reapplying for a driving license license for a period of 2 years. Clause 23, Chairperson, amends section 19 of the Act by providing that an examiner of driving license shall, on receipt of an application for substitution of a driving license, if he or she is satisfied that the existing license is a valid license and that the applicant is the holder thereof, issue or authorize the issue of a driving license in respect of that class of motor vehicle to which the existing license relates. Furthermore, any person whose license has become invalid in terms of sections 18.6 sub 6 or 7 of the Act and who requires a driving license, they must apply anew for the issue of such driving license. Clause 24, Chairperson, amends section 20 of the Act by providing that a driving license issued in terms of subsection 1 shall be deemed to be a driving license issued under this Act until the date fixed by the Minister by notice in the Gazette. Clause 25, Chairperson, substitutes section 23 of the Act and provides for circumstances under which a driving license authorizing a driving of a motor vehicle which was issued in any other country that is a contracting state to the Convention, and an international driving permit which was issued while the holder thereof was permanently or ordinarily resident in the Republic shall be deemed to be a driving license or a permit. Clause 26, Chairperson, amends section 25 of the Act by providing that if the holder of a learner's or a driving license issued in terms of Chapter 4 of the Act, a repealed ordinance or any other law, is disqualified from holding such a license, the CEO must cancel such license if the holder of a license constitutes a source of danger to the public by driving a motor vehicle on a public road, and an affirmation or affidavit in respect of circumstances relating to such source of danger is submitted to the CEO. Then the CEO may cancel or suspend such license. Clause 27, Chairperson, amends section 27 of the Act in order to clarify that an amendment is made in terms of section 18 sub 4B of the Act. Clause 28, Chairperson, amends section 28 of the Act to include grading in respect of registration of an instructor. Whereas Clause 29 amends section 28 capital A of the Act to provide that any person desiring to be registered as an instructor may apply at the driving license testing center to the CEO in respect of one or more of the classes for which a learner's or a driving license can be obtained in terms of the prescribed conditions. Clause 30, Chairperson, amends section 28 capital B of the Act, which provides for the requirements for eligibility for registration of a person as an instructor. This clause adds a new requirement that a person may not be registered as an instructor if he or she has been convicted of any offense listed in Schedules 1 or 2 of the Criminal Procedure Act, or if this person has been convicted of driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Clause 31 inserts sections 28 capital D, E, F, G, and H to provide for the compulsory registration and grading of driving schools and for the suspension and cancellation of registration by the MEC. Clause 32, Chairperson, amends section 29 of the Act by providing that a document purporting to be a learner's or a driving license issued contrary to Chapter 4 of the Act shall, on request of the Inspectorate for Driving License or Provincial Inspectorate, be declared void by the CEO. Upon his or her request, the holder of such a document shall forthwith submit the document to the Inspectorate of Driving License Testing Centers, who shall destroy the document in the prescribed manner. Further, providing that the CEO may, under the prescribed circumstances, condone the issue of a document referred to in subsection 1 and declare such a document to be a valid license from the date of the document. Clause 33, Chairperson, amends section 30 of the Act by providing that no person shall use any other person's learner's or driving license and present such a license as his or her own. Clause 34, Chairperson, amends section 31 of the Act by providing that no person who is the owner or operator or is in charge or control of a motor vehicle shall employ or permit any person to drive that vehicle on a public road unless that other person is licensed to drive the vehicle. He or she must verify that such a person is licensed before such a person drives such vehicle. Clause 35 amends Section 32 of the Act by prohibiting any person from driving a motor vehicle of a prescribed class on a public road except in accordance with the conditions of a professional driving permit issued to him or her, and unless such a person keeps such permit with him or her in the vehicle. Furthermore, if the person accompanying the holder of a learner's license is an examiner for driving license, such examiner does not have to be the holder of a professional driving permit. Clause 36, Chairperson, effects a technical amendment, whereas Clause 37 amends Section 34 of the Act by adding a new subsection to provide that where a court has issued an order directing a convicted person who is not the holder of a license or a permit to be disqualified from obtaining such a license, then the registrar or clerk of the court shall notify the MEC consent of such an order, and the MEC shall record such order in the Register of Driving Licenses. Clause 38, Chairperson, inserts Section 53, capital A in the bill to provide for the power of the MEC to delegate his or her authority to another person, although this does not prevent the MEC from exercising such power himself or herself. Clause 39, Chairperson, amends Section 57 of the Act, Passenger Rail Agents of South Africa in the authority to display road traffic signs or to remove road traffic signs in a railway level crossing on any public road. Clause 40, Chairperson, amends Section 58 of the Act, which provides for the authority to disregard road traffic signs to include a person who drives an emergency vehicle in the carrying out of his or her duties, or a person driving a vehicle while responding to a disaster in terms of the Disaster Management Act, permitting such person to disregard the directions of a road traffic sign which is displayed in the prescribed manner, and in the case where such vehicle is approaching certain intersections, such a driver to stop at the intersection and proceed only when it is safe to do so. Clause 41, Chairperson, amends Section 60 of the Act to provide that the driver of an emergency vehicle who drives such a vehicle in the carrying out of his or her duties, or a person driving a motor vehicle while responding to a disaster in terms of the Disaster Management Act, may not exceed a speed of 20 kilometers through an intersection. Clause 42 inserts a new Section 62, capital A in the Act and provides that in the event of a road accident, the emergency services shall immediately respond to the incident and render all the necessary services as prescribed. Clause 43, Chairperson, amends Section 76 of the Act to include Economic Commission of Europe regulations or model regulations in the provision of incorporation of standards by reference. Clause 44 amends Section 80 of the Act by providing that any disabled person who has been exempted from the laws relating to parking in accordance with the prescribed requirements and to whom proof of such exemption has been issued must be deemed to be so exempted from laws applicable in the area of jurisdiction of all authorities
Mira,
in the
Mira, can you please do your studying? There is light here.
Is it? Okay. Clause 31, Chairperson, 45 amends Section 81 of the Act by providing for circumstances under which a registered vehicle which does not comply with the provisions of the Act might be exempted and authorized to operate on a public road. Clause 46 amends Section 85 of the Act by providing that an application for the issue of a document as proof of a driving license must be made to the relevant MEC or minister, and such application shall be accompanied by the full names and identity of such an applicant and the appropriate fees. Clause 47 effects a technical amendment in respect of reference to the CEO, to its technical effects a technical amendment in respect of references and the CEO. 48 substitutes the heading of the section and the arrangement of the section, whereas 49 provides for the short title and commencement. Now, Chairperson, insofar as the consultation processes were concerned, this bill was discussed by provincial departments responsible for transport in the provinces, and other stakeholders were consulted. It was published in government gazette by the department, and so was it published by the Portfolio Committee on Transport twice, we might add, Chairperson. And it was discussed by the different committees established within the department, made up of officials from the different departments of transport. Insofar as the parliamentary procedures are concerned, Chairperson, the Office of the Chief State Law Advisors opined that this bill be tagged as a 76 and that it be dealt with in accordance with the procedures outlined in Section 76 of the Constitution. The recommendations are such that Chairperson will request the Standing Committee on Transport and Public Works in the Western Cape to note the proposed amendments to the National Road Traffic Amendment Bill and to approve the bill for further processing. I come to the end, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Advocate Nkatu, for your presentation and for taking us through it. It's much appreciated. Mr. Nkamu, we're going to the third bill, that is the National Land Transport Amendment Bill. Who's going to present that? Johan?
Chairperson, I think there should be someone online from
Okay.
Mr. Smelan, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair, that's correct. Mr. Similani did indicate that he's going to join us online, but I don't see him at the moment here.
Okay, is Mr. Similani online? Okay, fine, thank you. Let's just proceed. We will then move on to the next stage. The Department of Mobility, you wish to make any comments at this stage? I know we are going to have another engagement separately, but if you wish to make any comments, Advocate Collins and Mr. Bambu, if you wish to comment, you're welcome to do so now.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I think just for record purposes, the department did submit an extensive comment on the legislation that's been presented. Specifically with regards to the economic regulation on transport bill, I think it's about 30 pages of comments. And I do not want to necessarily go into the semantics, as part of this process, and I'm not sure to what extent the committee will be sharing some of these inputs up front with the department. But our key focus really and challenge that we were sitting with in relation to this bill speaks predominantly with regards to Section 4 and Section 11, which we are not able to find our way around it in terms of some of the proposals that has been put in there, and we're also not seeing how the minister will be able to enact some of these processes that they're trying to spell out. One of the key challenges, obviously, for us is the issue of the 70% market share, for example, and we're just really concerned about the impact on our subsidized bus service, for example, and also the impact on municipalities in as far as it relates to their IPTN implementation and the like. So I know that you said, Chairperson, there will be a further opportunity. So I don't want to go really into the semantics, but we will certainly want to use that opportunity if presented to go into more detail on some of the challenges that we are facing at this stage. Suffice to say at this point that the position from the department would be that they won't be able to support and they would the bill in its current state and current form. And obviously we would use that opportunity if given to us to persuade this committee and advise why we would have taken that particular stance. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Advocate Collins. Mr. Mbambu, okay, thank you, sir. And then we have Salga. Salga on the platform.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the opportunity. With this, Chair, I will request that Unathi Mtonitsi from Salga Head Office do a presentation. I will now give over to him. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Advocate. Thank you, Alderman Punt. Salga, please proceed.
Good evening, Chair, and thanks. And good evening to the honourable members. Good evening to my transport colleagues from National and from the province. Chair, I'd like to just focus on very key issues and not belabor the point. I think, Chair, first and foremost, as Salga, we are not happy with the way the land transport system is functioning. The latest provincial land transport framework that has been shared with us, which is from Gauteng, demonstrated some form of regress on key matrices of the measurement of the performance of the land transport system. One is the percentage of disposable income spent by families on commuting is increasing, it's not going down. The travel time between these origins and destinations is getting longer. So if you go back to the 1996 white paper on transport, you would see that some of the key measurements that it sought to change were those measurements, because the issue is, how does the land transport system affect our communities? And in the most populous province in the country, it's not working. And so we have challenges with that. So in essence, we can divide our comments into two issues. One are more generic issues about the performance of the land transport system, including some legal questionable issues. Then the other one speaks to the issues around the constitutionality of the bill. Chair, I'd like to focus on the issues of the constitutionality of the bill and give a historical account of events. Firstly is that when the bill, not this version of the bill, the earlier version of the bill, and maybe to contextualize by saying that is, this version of the bill, Chair, is post the president having not assented to the original bill and sent the bill back to the National Assembly.
Can I just, for clarity purposes, the reference is made to the National Land Transport Bill. Is that the one you're speaking to?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
But there are two processes, Chair, relating to this. You would see in the first bullet point on the slide, it says this process started in 2016. So when that process started, we had an opportunity as Salga to comment on this. And the sum of it is that our comments were not taken into account. And our comments were in two forms as we have them even now. One on constitutional issues and the other on the veracity and the effectiveness of the changes on the land transport system. Then that process was taken through the National Assembly. The National Assembly approved the bill. The bill was taken to the NCOP. It was approved. And in that process, none of the comments that we made as Salga in the city of Cape Town were considered. We were left with no other option but to then write to the President of the Republic and raise our concerns with him as the final arbiter to assent to any bill in the country. The President indeed did agree with us that these are issues of concern. The President did not assent to the bill, and the bill was sent back to the National Assembly. So the point being, in the first part, we were not materially consulted, because the point is, and I think the Constitutional Court has written quite extensively on this, consultation is not about ticking a box. Consultation is about taking into account the views that the stakeholders have made, including demonstrating how you have accommodated these views. Now, this didn't happen, and we ended up resorting to asking the president not to assent to the bill. Post that, a similar process to some extent has happened, certainly with the National Assembly, in the sense that we as SALGA wrote to the Portfolio Committee on Transport of the National Assembly, raised issues about constitutionality of this version of the bill, and we were never responded to. We were never acknowledged, and we were never responded to. So the sum of it is that when that bill was approved on the 25th of October last year, 2022, it had excluded some of the issues that we had raised, but it included other issues similar to the issues that we had raised, and I'll speak to that matter just now. If we can move to the next bill. So the summation of this slide, Chair, is really that we were not consulted in both instances, and I've outlined the two periods that I've spoken to. If we can move to the next slide so that we don't. There's an important matter that has been raised regarding the second process. The point being that legally, the process cannot be open wide as the first process to allow every stakeholder to comment on the process, because this process is post the president having asked for a review. Once we acknowledge and accept this, our view is surely that cannot include excluding the parties that had actually spoken to the president about the matter, because these are the parties that were aggrieved and wrote to the president. So even if you were to define that consultation as narrow as you can, surely it can't include SALGA and the City of Cape Town. It is common knowledge that these are the two parties that had written to the president for the president not to assent to the bill. So if those two parties are excluded, then from a consultation perspective, certainly the process is meaningless, certainly in our view. So we don't agree as SALGA that the definition of the narrowness of the consultation in the second process would exclude ourselves. We don't agree. So in essence, Chair, our view is that in both instances, we haven't been given any ear, and that's our complaint. If we can move to the next slide, please. Then let's deal with the issues on the clauses, because I think that is important. The first thing, Chair, is that to acknowledge, and certainly acknowledge from the Portfolio Committee on Transport, is Section 7 of the bill has been excluded in the new version of the bill that was approved by the National Assembly. But there is a caveat to that. Both the National Assembly and the Department of Transport make a very important statement to say that whatever the minister couldn't do now because Section 7 was excluded, the same minister would do the same things under a different clause of the Act. Now, the sum and the effect of that is it makes the exclusion of Section 7 of the bill a cosmetic exercise, because then clearly the minister can do as he or she wishes through a different clause. And and our view is that Section 5, subsection 6 of the Act, not of the bill, is in fact, in our view, unconstitutional, because that Section 5, subsection 6 of the Act allows for a direct intervention by a national minister on a municipality on functions that are mutually exclusive to municipalities. Typically, then, what that means is that a minister can issue a directive to a municipal council and say, we are going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are saying in our constitution that is not provided for. Section 139 provides only for a provincial executive to intervene. It doesn't provide for a national minister to intervene. Rather, Section 100 provides for a national minister to intervene in provincial matters, not in municipal matters. So a provision in a piece of legislation that allows for a minister to directly issue instructions to a municipal council, certainly in our view, is unconstitutional. So the part of the solution by the proposed bill to resolve the problem is itself not a solution, because it relies on a clause that we believe is itself unconstitutional. So the sum of the matter being that, in our view, the proposed changes, and certainly in the manner that the committee and the department had suggested, is not a solution. Typically, if this bill is approved as is, the minister can still intervene. And our view and the intention was that the minister cannot intervene in this manner. And for, I think, the portfolio committee and certainly the department to suggest that he should, then, as I've said, Chair, it makes really a meaningless exercise of the exclusion of Section 7 of the bill. We also want to suggest that the bill does not, in essence, stand on its own. Just because it's an amendment bill does not mean that it will stand on its own. It has to stand with the rest of the Act, post the approval by the process. So the idea that we can speak purely and solely to the bill and not say anything to the Act is, in our view, an unacceptable exercise. It doesn't make sense. Certainly, in our view, Chair, also is before we can even talk about intervention in municipalities, we must talk about capacited municipalities. So the question is, between Section 154 and Section 139 of the Constitution, which one comes first? And certainly in our view as SALGA, is that Section 154 comes first. In other words, both national government and provincial government must have sought to assist first before they can intervene. So in an instance where they just intervene without seeking to assist, we then feel that that's not in the spirit of the Constitution. And certainly, Chair, our view is the letter from the President to the National Assembly both had two issues. One, there was the spirit of the letter. The spirit of the letter was nothing that is unconstitutional must be done. That's the spirit of the letter. Then, of course, naturally, the President then gives the specific clauses that refers to, and those clauses were included into the bill. But surely, whatever then is the view of this standing committee, and certainly the standing committee of the National Council of Provinces, must include both the spirit of the letter and the specific clauses. And we believe that sticking purely to the clauses and exclude the spirit of the letter is not sufficient. Then, Chair, maybe to the next slide. So just before that one, sorry. So there was this point made to us that at this very late stage, SALGA cannot introduce new matters. And our view was that the issue of relying on Section 5, subsection 6 for the minister to intervene was not introduced by SALGA. That is in the minutes of the portfolio committee saying exactly that. So this issue is not a SALGA introduction. This was a matter written in the minutes of the portfolio committee. So as a solution, and then our response is simply to say it is not a solution. So it's not a matter introduced by ourselves. It's a part of the response to what the President had written from the National Assembly. So in that regard, Chair, we don't believe that it applies in this instance. If we can move to the next one. And then another concern of ours is parts of the NLTA uses a language, for example, where it will say the minister must ensure that public transport is integrated. And one of our questions is, but public transport in its entirety constitutionally is not an exclusive function of national government. There's public transport that is exclusively for municipalities and it's called municipal public transport. So how does the minister ensure on functions that don't belong to that sphere of government? Whereas you find in other parts of the legislation where it says the minister can encourage, which is a far more acceptable language in the type of constitutional democracy that we have, instead of saying the minister must ensure. And our view is that that wording of ensure surely relies on Section 5, subsection 6, where the minister then can issue instructions to a municipal council on what to do. And if that is the case, our view is that that section 5 subsection C is in effect on its own unconstitutional. If you can move to the next one. So, Chair, the second last slide, the proposed changes in our behalf is that the National Council of Provinces must add clauses to the bill and amend both Section 5, subsection 4 and Section 5, subsection 6 of the Act. Also, in the bill, there's Section 11, subsection 8, Section 11, subsection 9, Section 11, subsection 10. These sections are new sections. They are part of the bill. They rely on Section 5, subsection 6. They rely on the part of the Act we contend that it's unconstitutional. And therefore, in our view, those sections must also either be excluded or be modified, because their reliance on the intervention of the minister is based on Section 5, subsection 6. And certainly, Chair, in our view as SALGA is, if these changes are not made, then we would have been excluded materially in both instances of the review of these bills, if these changes are not made. In other words, these bills would have effectively gone through the approval, nullifying all the comments SALGA made and effectively even not responding to what the president had said. So in that regard, Chair, that's our submission. I think this is the last slide. So in conclusion, sir, maybe that, I think, Chair, that's the most important thing is we've been excluded up to this point as SALGA. None of the things that we've submitted as inputs have been really taken into account. That's our view. And secondly, that the changes that still want to use Section 5, subsection C for the minister to intervene, they make the reference of the bill back to the National Assembly null and void. Because our view is it's not just an issue of changing words in a piece of legislation. Pieces of legislation influence practice. So, in other words, even if you want to do the same thing in a different way, it's still wrong. So whether they want to do it to Section 7 of the bill or they want to do it to Section 5, subsection 6 of the Act, in our view, it's still wrong. It's still a minister intervening on municipal issues when there's no such a provision. Hence, we say it then makes this whole process of excluding Section 7 from the bill of no meaning, because they then say they'll do exactly the same thing via different clause. So that's the concern that we have. So in that regard, Chair, as SALGA, we don't support the bill as is. We think that the bill does not respond to what the president had asked them to do, doesn't respond to the spirit of the letter of the president. And certainly we've not been, or put differently as a departing point, Chair, had we had this meeting with the Portfolio Committee on Transport in the National Assembly, this wouldn't be necessary. Had we had that meeting, had we had a similar engagement, either with the Department of Transport and the Portfolio Committee on Transport from the National Assembly, this meeting wouldn't be necessary. Or our submission of not supporting this bill wouldn't be necessary. But we were never given that chance. In fact, it's only through this National Council of Provinces process that we've had a chance, especially in the second part of the bill, to engage. And in that regard, Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donitsi, for your presentation. Just a comment is that you have on more than one occasion stated that none of your submissions were taken into consideration during the portfolio National Assembly processes. So we've gone through a presentation now, and it is not as detailed as a presentation, as a submission would be, as in terms of what you shared with us. So did you submit a more detailed submission to us other than the presentation that we've dealt with?
Chair, I think the shortcut to that is to give to this standing committee the same submission, because that was a detailed submission, written submission we gave to the NCOP standing committee. So, Chair, I think what we would do is we would just send exactly the same commentary.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mtonitsi. I appreciate that because then we can work through it and possibly consider inviting you again to an engagement that we can go through the submission in more detail instead of, you gave a high-level overview of your submission, so it can help us a lot.
Yes, Chair. Maybe one last point I'd like to maybe clarify. On the 6th of March, this calendar year, there was a meeting between ourselves and the Department of Transport. That meeting happened because we had attended a COTO meeting. At that COTO meeting, the department had made some presentations about the issues around subsidized bus contracts. And as SALGA and our members, we are very, and I must say, Chair, openly, we are very weary of the devolution of those subsidized bus contracts to municipalities. We are very apprehensive about that. Apprehensive because historically, the funding associated with this contract has not been commensurate with the operations. I do know of provinces that have had to take out of their equitable share to close the gap between the cost of the operations and the subsidy that is available. So we're very wary about that. So the meeting happened because of that, and it happened on the 6th of March this calendar year. Chair, just to recall or to bring to your remembrance that the bill was approved by the National Assembly on the 25th of October 2022. Put differently, if the intention was to consult SALGA about the bill, then the meeting should have happened before the 25th of October 2022. If the intention was to consult. So you cannot claim consultation post the approval by the National Assembly. Because if the intention was to consult us, it should have happened before then. It didn't happen, Chair. So as far as we're concerned, there was never. Even the written submissions we made to the Portfolio Committee, they were never responded to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mtonichi. I hear what you're saying, and believe me that this process is designed to be alive and open to various inputs. You did mention that we don't agree with that, we don't support that, we think this, that, and the other. And we've also now agreed that we're going to get a copy of your full submission that you have submitted to the National Assembly's Portfolio Committee. Can I just inquire from you whether that submission also contained possible improvements to the bill that you envisage to make it a more acceptable bill, or is it simply just, we don't agree with that clause and etc.? Thank you.
No, Chair. The submission was actually to highlight one, constitutional issues, but also to request an engagement, where we then said at that engagement, then we can have a full elaborate engagement about the bill. And you're correct, Chair, there are parts of the bill we support, and there are no issues around those parts of the bill. But at the same time, as I've said earlier on, we do have concerns about the performance of the land transport system. And if you look into the whole evolution from the white paper in 1996 to the National Land Transport Transition Act, to the Public Transport Strategy, to the National Land Transport Act, something submissions was, and it's part of the submission to the NCOP, is out of the 93 clauses of the Act, 56 are being amended. And in our view, it's an overhaul of the legislation. It's not a changing one part or where we need to deal with e-hailing services, so we need to put in clauses that deal with the e-hailing services. It's not like that. There's a major overhaul of the Act. And our view is that's a sign that something is not right. So beyond just whether the clause is right or it's not right, but we have to ask ourselves important questions about the performance of the system and whether we've put in the right policy and legislative instruments to give the outcome that we're all looking for. So that we've made. But that submission to the portfolio committee was saying, here's an alarm regarding the constitutionality of this issue. Please allow us to engage with yourselves as one of the parties that had written to the president, so that we can have a much more elaborate engagement on the bill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mtonichi. We'll wait the submission and then we see whether there might be further clarification that we may require to assist us in interpreting this submission more meaningfully. Then we will certainly engage with you. Thank you, sir. Okay, the next presentation we will have from Golden Arrow. You have comments to make on the presentation? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Honourable Chair, members, colleagues in the chamber tonight, thank you for the opportunity. I was approached by Golden Arrow to consider their position in respect of the bill and also make certain comments and submissions in respect of a very narrow portion of the proposed amendments. And the way I hope to do that this evening is just to first of all give the committee an overview of who the company is, to get the sense that they are in fact a transport company on the ground dealing with the implementation of the Act, so to speak. Also to deal with the history of how the operating licenses were acquired throughout the various iterations of our transport statutes. And then to make a very key point about an operating license being considered property. And when I say property, it should be in inverted commas because I'm referring to property in terms of the Constitution and Section 25 and how that protects property. And then lastly, just want to conclude on why the bill and this one provision that it contains will affect that particular property of Golden Arrow and essentially amount to an arbitrary deprivation thereof. So by doing those four things, I hope to get to the point that the committee will see that a small change could actually help avoid this particular problem. Now, I just want to divert from the slides for 1 second because the one thing that the members joining tonight may have missed now because the bill wasn't presented by the department is a presentation on what it seeks to do. So I'll just read essentially from 2.27 of the bill, which essentially tells the committee what the intention of this particular clause is. And that is on page 27 of the bill, 2.27, clause 27, amendment of section 47 of Act 5 of 2009. Clause 27 amends section 47 of the Act to extend the provisions on the conversion of permits to operating licenses that were issued under the Transition Act for a period of not longer than 7 years. So essentially what this seeks to do is where there previously were clauses which dealt with if you weren't going to convert your permit that would lapse after a certain period of time, that would now be extended to operating licenses as well. And there are two distinct features of licenses or two distinct types of licenses, permits being from an older version of the transport legislation and operating licenses being the Transition Act up until present, and we're still dealing with them today. So to go back to that first part to explain who Golden Arrow is, really is an important part of the transport infrastructure in the Western Cape, most certainly. 160 years of providing road-based transport services, a staggering number of 230,000 travelers daily traveling on their buses, They employ a significant amount of persons, 2,500 people rely on employment from Golden Arrow. They have a fleet of over 1,170 buses, and these buses all have operating licenses as well. So it is most certainly any changes to operating licenses have a significant impact on an operator dealing with these types of numbers. Their contribution to triple BEE is level 2, and they've also formed part of the public company discourse in that they are part of a JSE listed company, Frontier Holdings. Now, the reason why we sketch that picture is to understand that the company has a significant footprint in the transport business and doesn't raise the objection lightly. This will have a significant impact on them. And I've given a summary of what the objection is, and I say that by understanding the origins of Golden Arrow's operating licenses and their statuses as assets, and I'll come back to that and I'll deal with it in more detail, which the company has relied on to become a successful company it is today, we will demonstrate that to interfere with the vested rights which Golden Arrow have in terms of their operating licenses will amount to an arbitrary deprivation of property. And I go on to just address that particular section that I read out earlier, Mr. Chair, of Clause 27 and how it amends Section 47(2) of the Land Transport Act in the manner in which Section 27 of the Bill envisions. And I say that that will amount to an arbitrary deprivation of property. Now, the history of the operating licenses, is the next slide, is very important. And firstly, I just want to mention that the operating licenses that Golden Arrow has is for a broad area. It really covers the greater jurisdiction of the city of Cape Town and also parts of the Cape Winelands District Municipality through Paarl and Stellenbosch, going up that way, Malmesbury as well. Now, the authority that these operating licenses hold, and this is all important for context because there's two main types of authority. The one is existing authority, which has come through, and it's sort of a legacy authority that Golden Arrow has, and this is to provide transport services, unscheduled bus, organized parties, and a certain type of employment service, which Golden Arrow has had throughout the years. It, subsequent to that, also obtained contracted authority, which it currently exercises with the Western Cape government, the Department of Transport locally, to render commuter services. Now, that is less relevant to the existing authority that I'd like to refer to, which is my second bullet point there. The existing authority is what predates its contracted authority that it has with the Western Cape government. Now, with this existing authority in mind, it's useful now to look at the next slide, where we try to divide the history of the operating licenses into three different eras, so to speak. There was the original position, which dealt with the Motor Carrier Transport Act. This is very old legislation, 1930, into the Road Transport Act, 1977. And then we deal with the transitional position, which is your National Land Transport Transition Act, which was a 2002 legislation. And then we move into the current act as it stands today, which is the National Land Transport Act. And we're dealing with the bill that's not yet enacted. So turning to the original position and to understand where these rights came from to operate, some of the because of the history of the company being 160 years old, some of them may have come from the original dispensation, the Motor Carrier Transportation Act. But the bulk were issued out in terms of the Road Transport Act. And when applying for a permit under this particular legislation, Section 16 was the operative section in that dispensation, which is somewhat different to today's acts. And Section 16 was very clear. It said that the period of a public permit, the Commission or Board may grant or renew a public permit for an indefinite period or in its discretion for such a fixed period as it may determine. The point being that a legislative administrative body could apply its mind to the relevant facts in front of it and grant licenses as it saw fit, and in this case, tie a period to a license. It could be indefinite, could be definite. And that is where we get to with the indefinite operating licenses of Golden Arrow currently. The Transition Act then sought to deal with these particular indefinite operating licenses, and you were allowed to convert your permit into an operating license with an indefinite period. And where you get this from is when you look at the Transition Act, specifically Section 32(4) and 81(1), And just on the next slide, I've actually given the excerpt of those particular acts where it specifically says, in the words in 32.4, says, subject to this act, an operating license that has been converted from a permit confers the same authority and has the same status as the permit for which it was converted. In similar words, section 81.1, subject to this act, an operating license issued in place of a permit pursuant to the conversion contemplated in section 79 must confer the same authority as that which has been conferred by the permit, except for routes, and routes could be detailed, especially from radius type authorities. So essentially recognizing that where you had an indefinite operating license, that right to that indefinite operating license would be protected and you would be conferred the same authority through the Transition Act. The current position, National Land Transport Act 2009, we find that it is silent on the conversion of indefinite operating licenses, and that's for a good reason, because the definition of operating license in the National Land Transport Act, Section 1, says an operating license means a license required by Section 50 and granted and issued in accordance with this Act or the Transition Act. So if you had an operating license that was issued in terms of the Transition Act for an indefinite period, the current iteration of the legislation recognized that, and you didn't have to do anything. And that's the position that we sit with today. What happens with a company like Golden Arrow, who's quite intentional about upgrading their fleet, there are occasionally renewals. And I just wanted to highlight for this committee that what the current procedure is at the regulatory entities is that where it is necessary to do a renewal of an operating license, the position is that if you renew an indefinite operating license, you are issued with an indefinite operating license. That is, in fact, the expectation of all holders of operating licenses as it currently stands. So we're dealing here with a position that is quite clear, where your indefinite operating licenses have been protected up until now, and in fact, as it stands today, that will not be interfered with. So the next slide, we make the point, and this point, I've put an NB at the bottom there just to make the point that this is not just applicable to Golden Arrow, but this is in fact important for all indefinite operating license holders. It cuts across the board. And we say that building on the rights vested in Golden Arrow through its operating licenses, the company has used this asset, and that word is used purposefully because, there's lots of semantics you could use for rights, assets, property, but essentially when it's an asset, it's something that's good for you. And they've used this right to an indefinite operating license to employ thousands of people, transport millions of passengers annually, invest billions into its business. And importantly for the department, I would say, is advance the transport industry by being early adopters of various technologies, including the latest electric buses that we've seen on the roads, which I think is a fantastic innovation. And we make the point, which I've already made, that this definitely cuts across the board. This is not something that only affects Golden Arrow as an indefinite operating license holder, but all operators. Now, in the next portion, so we've dealt with Golden Arrow as a company, and we've dealt with the history of the operating licenses, and we say that these are vested rights which shouldn't be interfered with. But to bring that point home, just the next slide, we deal with operating license as property, because for your property not to be deprived, it needs to be property in terms of Section 25, and that's a very specific kind of property. The best way to make the point is to look at what the stakeholders in the industry are doing with the particular operating licenses to see if it is characteristic of property in the sense of it. Because we're not dealing here with a cell phone or a car, we're dealing with incorporeal property, which is a right, a license. So what are the stakeholders doing? We say that the legislature itself recognizes operating licenses as property. And we find that through various iterations of the transport legislation. The earliest I could particularly find was Section 26A of the Road Transport Act 1977. Now, property cannot be deprived arbitrarily and compensation must be paid for it in terms of Section 25. And we find that Section 26A would pay compensation where rail was established in competition for bus services. So in essence, paying compensation for this particular right where it was impacted on in terms of Section 26A. The second place we find recognition of an operating license as property is in the Transition Act, Section 34(1). Now, it's very interesting in the Transition Act. It tried to clarify that an operating license is not a right coming from the 1977 Act, but recognized that operating licenses issued and coming from the Road Transport Act were in fact rights. The section reads, except on the conversion of a permit to an operating license, no person has a right to be issued with an operating license. So very clearly the legislature says, no person has a right to this operating license, except if you had a permit in terms of the Road Transport Act, then you are entitled to one, recognizing that that is in fact a right that you have that is vested in you and tantamount to property. The National Land Transport Act, you have to be a little bit more, you have to read it more liberally. And Section 47(4) is an example where, once again, this characteristic of property being compensated for, this particular act says at 47(4), the holder of any permit that lapses or is cancelled in terms of this part, and referring to where your operating license lapses after 7 years, may not be or is not entitled to compensation by virtue of it lapsing. So based on the maxim that the legislature understands the impact of its particular provisions, if that section was not there, compensation would be payable. But by statute, it is now excluded. So once again, recognizing this property-like characteristic of compensation being payable for operating licenses. We also know that property, a very important characteristic of property is that it can be transferred, and the Act is not blind to this. The legislature was not blind to this. They specifically created Section 58, read with Section 77, which allows for the transfer of an operating license, and I say that that's a key characteristic of property. So the first point is that the legislature recognizes that an operating license is property. The second class of, and it's the next slide over, the second class of stakeholder is we say that prominent academics also recognize licenses, operating licenses, permits, licenses as property. And I've not gone into the minutiae of what our learned professors at universities say, but that is included in the submission made on 19 May by Golden Arrow if the committee wants to look further at that. And most certainly is indicative of what jurists and courts would look at. So that we felt it's important just to point out that we're not alone in this boat. The third very important stakeholder is the industry. Now, people possessing operating licenses are regularly ceding them via transfer and via succession. In fact, the department will tell you, and the PREs will tell you, that they're inundated with transfers through succession, where wills have to be presented to show that a son has transferred his operating license to his, or a father to his son. And these are indicative of, all sorts of succession implications, because property is transferred through succession every single day of our lives, and operating license is no exception. The last point we make of a stakeholder that recognizes operating licenses as property is the regulatory entities themselves. And I've made the point already that if you walked in there today with an indefinite operating license and you asked for a renewal because you've upgraded your vehicle, you will walk out with an indefinite operating license. Evidently, the position that operating licenses are property is already entrenched in our transport industry, and the impact of this amendment will have far-reaching consequences. Now, it's important that the word entrenched there, I want the committee just to dwell on that, because essentially you'll be trying to upend an entrenched position in the industry by trying to make operating licenses which are indefinite finite. And it must be considered that this has in fact been the position for decades. And that really is where we are coming from. Now, having dealt with an operator on the ground having to deal with over 1,000 operating licenses, the history of how these rights and licenses were obtained, and demonstrating that they are indeed property which is deserving of protection of Section 25 of our Constitution, i.e. that they cannot be infringed upon arbitrarily. In the next slide, we make suggested changes to the bill, and this is to be proactive. This is to try and assist the committee by seeing that with a small change, we could avoid the problem. And I've placed in boxes the particular words that we've added, and we've given two options. which we think would be something that the committee could consider if it is indeed its position. And the option 1 would be to expressly provide for indefinite operating license holders to renew their operating license for an indefinite period of time. And then we give our suggested wording, and I've counted it, it's about 12 words over 2 phrases, which just add in provisos that allow for indefinite licenses, when renewed, to be renewed for an indefinite period. The option 2 is a bit more subtle, and you could remain silent on how indefinite operating licenses will be treated. Now, this was the option that the legislature took in 2009. They remained silent on what would happen with indefinite operating licenses. They only dealt with permits from the old Road Transport Act, but not operating licenses which were converted in terms of the 2002 Act, which were recognized in the definition. So you could take that route as well as the legislature and simply only refer to definite period operating licenses, thereby excluding indefinite period operating licenses. And the purpose being that the status quo will remain. The status quo that so many people and transport operators have relied on for decades, that these indefinite operating licenses are integral assets to their particular transport businesses. And these, either one of these, we suggest will be sufficient to remove any potential difficulties with unconstitutionality should the Act find its way onto the statute books. Now, unless there are any questions, that really does conclude our presentation, and I hope that it was well received.
Thank you, Advocate Titus. That's short and sweet and to the point, like it. So next person who I'm going to request or if they wish to make a comment is the Office of the Premier. Yeah, if you wish to make a comment, you're not obliged to. And
I have nothing to add right now. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Over to you, sir. Okay, thank you so much. And then lastly, we have Mr. Smith on the line on the virtual platform that may wish to share a comment or two with the committee. Mr. Smith, are you with us still?
Hi, good evening. Yes, I am.
Good evening, Mr. Smith. You may proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any presentations. How beautiful the presentations were presented. I take heed and I take knowledge from what I've seen now. Like my opening statement, I'm a layman, interested party in this understanding of the bill of transportation in our country. I like the previous speaker spoke, the Advocate Titus, around about the lack of the presentation from the representative on the act or the bill. Other than that, all I can say, I have made my written submission to the understanding of the bill, and I will not further present anything in writing other just to make a few comments around about the Salga presentation and the Golden Arrow presentation, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smith. I just concurred with the procedural officer that you did receive a submission from you in writing. Thank you so much for that. Pardon me. So I'd like to thank the presenters who share the content and of the bills with us and their comments. Appreciate it very much. I'm going to open the meeting now just for the committee members if there's any questions that they would like to ask for clarification purposes. And then we take it from there. We'll start with our member in the chamber, Honorable Sileku. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? No?
No, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've listened, and when we engage as a committee, then that's where I will interrogate all the submissions that we have received from the relevant stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Sileku. Appreciate it. Honourable Murray, are you still on the platform? Do you have any questions you'd like to that you may like to ask, or for clarification purposes? Honourable Murray, are you unmute?
Apologies, Chair, I'm here.
Sure. You have any questions you'd like to ask for clarification purposes, or anything else, or comment you'd like to make?
None from my side. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Murray. Any other member that may have joined us after the commencement of the meeting that's on the platform that'd like to? Any other member of the public who's on the platform that did not introduce him or herself would like to bring your presence to our attention, and you'd like to make a comment or two? Okay, it doesn't look like it. So, stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, it's the most important part of the evening now. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And I want to express a particular word of gratitude to the National Department of Transport, who have always been willing and available to engage with us in terms of the content of the bills. Since the introduction of the bill to the Provincial Standing Committee on Mobility, the National Department of Transport the officials were extremely open and available to us, and I'd like to express our committee's heartfelt gratitude and thanks for that willingness to assist and be available. As for other, I want to thank Golden Arrow for your submission. I think I have not gone through it yet, but Johan has it, and we will certainly consider all the submissions that we have received from other stakeholders who may not be Mr. Smith. We will consider your submission as well. So the process that we undertook is basically just to gather the information, get the consultation process going. The committee will, consider all of the consultations, and if need be, request stakeholders to submit further submissions for clarification purposes only. We were fortunate that the negotiating mandate and have been sort of extended now, so there will be additional time for us to consider submissions. I think that whatever the submission is, no submission is insignificant to be considered by the standing committee. So from the outset, because of the truncated time period for us to consider these three bills, we decided on 2 public hearings, and this is the second and the last public hearing. We will then schedule the necessary meetings and processes to deal with the 3 bills, and then give a mandate from the Provincial Parliament. And so with all the other 8 provinces, and then the NCOP will then finally make the decisions. I'll wait Salga's submission, and if there are any other further submissions that stakeholders may wish to share with us before we decide on a final mandate, the negotiating mandate, then they're welcome to do so. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if there's any remarks you'd like to park. Mr. Ngamu, is there anything that you'd like to say in conclusion?
Thank you, Chair. It's only unfortunate that my colleague from SALGA had, as well as from the bus company, had extensive comments, but as a department, I think we can avail ourselves for further clarity. For example, Western Cape on issues they are not happy with, if they are available, we can arrange a day to unpack this thing in detail, like we are planning to do with one of the provinces, just to set half a day or a day aside to do a workshop on this bill. Thank you, Chair. But thanks again for hosting us. I don't know if Advocate, through your Chair, has anything in regards to his bill. Apologies for non-presentation of this other bill.
Thanks, Chairperson and honourable members. I've no comments or inputs. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mkhatu. Do we have Councillor Alderman Pitt? Do you have any last remark you'd like to make?
No, thank you, Chair. And just thank you for the opportunity that we could present from SALGA's side to this community, to this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Pitt. Department, Advocate Collins.
I think we covered. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Office of the Premier. Okay, fine, thank you. Advocate Leroux. Okay. So, Advocate Titus.
I think we covered as well, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So allow me to thank all the members present and all the stakeholders who joined us virtually. I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks to Nomfundo Mpelo, and then Mama Mpelo, and then to Johan, who have diligently put these things together for us. And then lastly, at the members' lounge at the back, there's refreshments for those who like to grab a cup of coffee before they leave and have something to eat. You're most welcome to enjoy that at the back. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much once again. And those of us who travel back to Pretoria, may you have a safe journey back, and we'll be in touch. And with that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairperson.